So I've been working on a game I'm calling Population Undefined. It's a game about controlling an entire city from a single console as you interact with mysterious forces and nefarious organizations. If you want a little more detail about what I'm envisioning, check out my video where I talk about my design document. So my main focus so far has been on organizing my development efforts as best I can, and along with that, I've been tracking every minute I've spent on this game. I just hit the 15-hour mark. So I thought it'd be cool to go through the game and take stock of where the systems are at, the tools that I'm using, what the art is like, and really just be open about what a game looks like this early on in the process. This being the first commercial game that I've worked on to this level of effort, it's exciting for me because as I have more to show, I'll be able to see the progression of the game, over the next few months at these different kind of time milestones. So the console and Population Defined is essentially just one big menu in the sense that the player will constantly be navigating between different screens, and that's how they interact with the city. So these screens give access to every aspect, down to the agricultural output, the energy distribution, things like that. The only real screen I have in the game is the boot up process and the login screen. I'm happy with the concept that I have of the boot up process. It's kind of a cool effect, but it's a work in progress just because I think it needs to be a little more involved. And the login process I'm not happy with, and I think I'm going to remove it entirely and try to find a more interesting way of logging in. In the tune of calling the game one big menu, I needed a way to easily define the navigation between all of these different screens, because it's going to be this large, branching tree of all these different places the player can go. And however I had defined that to begin with was just terrible. And it took so much time to add screens and tedious. Oh man, it was just horrible. So what I have now at its base level is just a JSON file, and I can define each console screen as a single object. Very simple. Each screen has a list of buttons with a display name and the name of the scene that the button corresponds to. So if you're on a screen, you'll see the buttons. You click on one, it takes you to a new screen. In the code, I have it set up so that when you move to a new console screen, it finds itself in the JSON file and creates those instances of those buttons at runtime. So it makes it a lot simpler. I don't have to maintain those buttons at all in the node structure of Godot, other than having that parent console button scene. Beyond that, I think the coolest thing that I have in the game that's working is the printing and paper interactions. And that's really good because that's essentially the meat of the game. I have a video on how I'm handling the paper dragging for the most part, but it still has a few parts that I'm constantly kind of tweaking. I tried to add a little glide or slide to the paper so that when you release it, it moves a little bit further on the console as if, you'd kind of tossed a piece of paper, just so that it felt a little more realistic. But it's causing issues in small ways, like when it collides with the corner of the printer, it'll kind of adjust its speed as it kind of shoots past, and mostly because it's tracking the mouse. So if you release it and then just yank the mouse off to the side, it can cause issues with the velocity. But for the printer itself, it's actually just a sprite that covers the paper to create kind of the effect that you're sliding the paper into something 3D. And then on the back of it, there's this collision shape, just kind of a rectangle wrapped around the back, so that the player can set the paper inside of the printer whenever there's a system in place for retrieving the paper. It may not look like it, but I have spent a decent amount of time on the art in this game, and the reason it doesn't look like it is because, like many people, I feel like art will always be my biggest struggle when it comes to game development, and I mostly end up relying on rectangles. So this whole game is essentially a series of rectangles: the paper, the console, everything. And most of what I've done so far has been me just messing around in Asprite, trying to find a decent look for the console. When I first started working on it, I actually reached out to an awesome pixel artist on Twitter and got a commission piece created that I thought I was going to use for the game. And I'll put a link in the description to his profile. Amazing work. There were a lot of components and buttons and wires, which I really loved, and that's what we had talked about, kind of expanding on the idea of the printer. But I knew that there was too much on the screen for me to maintain for the actual function of the game. I essentially didn't want anything on the screen that doesn't have at least some reasonably consistent importance to the player. So I wanted to keep things as simple as possible. So I went with my original plan, and I'd love to know what you think about it when you see both of these designs. The last thing that I've been playing with recently is building out some of the assets in the game with the vector editing tool Sketch, and then just exporting them at a lower resolution so that it's pixel art. It's working really well. It feels a little hacky just because I'm working in a vector editing tool, which makes it a lot easier to design things, but I'll take it because it makes it so much easier. And it's really important to speed up this process because ideally there's going to be dozens of different paper designs and console screens and things like that. So there's a lot to do, and the faster I can do it, the better. On the organizational side of developing this game, I've been using a Notion dashboard that I actually created, and I shared this in some different circles because it's actually a tool meant to help you maintain and build any kind of software project. And I've been testing it out with game development, and I think it works really well. It'll be even more useful to me when I release the game because it's designed to help track things like expenses and revenue, marketing efforts, communication templates, things like that. All that will be very important. So like I said, it's for software projects in general, but I think it works really well for game development. If you're interested, check out the link in the description. Use the code PopulationUndefined for 25% off. As far as the game, I think that's all I really have to show for it right now. The next time I do this, maybe we'll be around like the 30-hour mark, which will hopefully come sooner rather than later. And I think there'll be a huge difference in the game versus the first 15 hours. Hopefully I'll have a somewhat playable demo at some point just so people can start kind of interacting with the console and see what that feels like. Other than that, I appreciate you watching. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.